All right, it's here, Christmas Day, in the college basketball world at least. So there's actually games happening as we speak. Nebraska and we also have Xavier playing for notable teams, but more better games later on. And then this week we have a lot of good games. So Thanksgiving turns out to not just be a football holiday at least in 2020. So Unfortunately, we have to start with some bad news, which is Tennessee and Baylor are kind of on pause. So Baylor, obviously, second team in the country, in my opinion, best team. Well, we'll get to that part later because Gonzaga did some things, but um, second best team in the country. Tennessee's top 15 team. Both were playing some very big games and looking like that might not happen. Baylor's already been kind of knocked out of some tournaments and some games have been postponed slash canceled. Tennessee, same situation. We have to get used to that this year. There's going to be times where we don't get to watch good games. We just have to be thankful that there is actually basketball on my television right now, and that's all I really care about. Hopefully, everybody stays healthy, and we can have a tournament at the end. And before we get right into it, we have major conference previews out, which Jonah and I did, and then mid-major conference previews are out as well, with my friend Matt, who literally is the eat, sleep, breathe mid-major basketball and knows so much more than I could ever dream of with mid-majors. So please check those out if you want to figure out your bracket pre-March, which I think is a key to people doing well. You either can pick randomly or you can watch a lot of basketball and learn about these mid-majors that can upset people. So with that, we're going to jump right into games. Today, which is Wednesday, we should have had Baylor against Arizona State tonight. Baylor had to opt out. First, Arizona State opted out because they didn't want to play Baylor for COVID reasons, and then Baylor opted out. So instead, we get Arizona State against Rhode Island. So, Jonah, what do you think about that game?
Yeah, so I mean, before I get into this game, I just want to get into what you said about the COVID issues a little bit, and obviously, I agree. We all got to be thankful that we have the basketball that we do have, with head coaches and probably players as well testing positive left and right. You're going to see a lot of these cancellations. You're going to see games made up on the fly that get scheduled a day before they happen, but that's just going to add another exciting dimension to what I think is going to be a pretty good college basketball season. And the biggest game starting out is this Arizona State Rhode Island matchup. You got two really great guards, Fats Russell of Rhode Island and Remy Martin of Arizona State. This is a big opportunity to get a win for Rhode Island because they will not have opportunities within their conference to get wins like this, and who knows how many of these non-conference games they're going to actually be able to play. So this is really a big opportunity for them. Arizona State probably has Villanova coming up next. They're playing Boston College tonight, and they should win that game. So the Sun Devils got to be careful to avoid looking past Rhode Island because they're a pretty decent team as well.
Yeah, so for responsible betting purposes, I think Villanova hammers Boston College because, in my opinion, Boston College is probably the second worst team in the ACC this year. Villanova is obviously top three team. That should not be close. To get to this game, so if you listen to the mid-major preview, the Atlantic 10 probably is going to go through St. Louis this year. URI is probably a step behind. So this is a big game for URI and for the A10 if they want to get a two-bid conference. And we also talked about in that mid-majors are probably going to have a lot more difficulty with two big conferences just because who knows what games they're going to get. And who knows how strong their schedule is going to look at the end of the season. So with this game, Rhode Island, I think, comes out very aggressively. Arizona State, as we talked about, is very talented, but also very young with Josh Christopher and Marcus Bagley. So Remy Martin has to play a big game. If he loses this matchup to Fats Russell, it's going to be pretty hard, I think, for Arizona State to win. And Arizona State, I think you're right in that they could be overlooking Rhode Island and looking for that Villanova matchup. I'm still going to give the edge to Arizona State. I still think they'll find a way. This is a big year for Arizona State, and I think they know that. If they're going to try to contend for anything bigger than just the Pac-12 championship, feels like it has to be this year. So I think Remy's ready to go, and Josh Christopher pretty quickly announces how good he is. So are you going to Arizona State in that one too?
Yeah, I'm going Arizona State as well.
All right, so that would we're just going to kind of stick with this one since that's a tournament, and that would give us Villanova against Arizona State on Thursday on Thanksgiving. So, what do you think about that game and that potential matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I think relative to how good the teams actually are, I like Arizona State against Villanova a little bit more than I do against Rhode Island, at least against the spread, because they do tend to play well in these games against really high quality opposition. You saw them beat Kansas a couple of years back. They really put them on the national map and Bobby Hurley. So I think that if they can get past Rhode Island, Hurley's going to have his team ready for Villanova. But um, ultimately, I think that just the talent up and down Villanova's roster is probably a little bit too much for Arizona State. I think it's very possible that Remy Martin is the best player on the court in that game, but I think that the Wildcats just have more depth, and I think that'll ultimately get them to a win over Arizona State.
Yeah, I think Arizona State is kind of like a two-trick pony in that it's really Josh Christopher and Remy Martin. I think that's as good of a duo as any team really has in the country. With that being said, Jeremiah Robinson Earl plus Colin Gillespie. Honestly, for me, Jeremiah Robinson Earl plus any player that you add with Villanova is a very good duo as well. I think JRE is a matchup nightmare for Arizona State, and I think that on the other hand, Villanova has enough guys that can at least hang with Josh Christopher. Kind of anticipating Jermaine Samuels being the guy that covers him, and I think Villanova is good enough to just make it tough on him. Remy, I think, has a big game because I feel like he always does. He has huge games against Kansas in his career. So Villanova, I think that continues, and Colin Gillespie's going to have his hands full there, or Justin Moore. So I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a good game to watch and a very fun thing to do on Thanksgiving for the football games that we will be talking about soon, but might not be as good as past years. So I'm going to go Villanova in that one. I think you are too, right?
Yes.
All right. So then another huge game on Thanksgiving. We have Kansas against Gonzaga. Going to be the Fort Myers Classic or Fort Myers Tip-Off, whatever. But Fort Myers, Florida. Um, this one, I'll let you talk about first because I'm going to be rude to one of these teams. But so, what do you think about Kansas Gonzaga?
Yeah, so I'm guessing the team you're going to be rude to is Kansas. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Gonzaga, then give you a chance to get
Sure.
into Kansas. I think Gonzaga is the best team in the country, even over Baylor. I think it's close, but there's just so much talent on this Gonzaga team. And one guy I want to focus on is Drew Timme. Like, I think that you saw when Philip Petrusev left the program this summer, there was just not a lot of concern among the Gonzaga coaching staff about that, as productive as Petrusev was, because they were expecting Drew Timme to step right in there. And I think you're going to see that in this game. I think Kansas has issues in the front court in terms of defense. I mean, they don't have Azubuike anymore, who was really their defensive anchor. And so I think they're going to have problems containing the Gonzaga front court. And um, yeah, I mean, I'll let you go into how overrated you think Kansas is, but and I do expect Kansas to look better later in the season, but I think in this opening game they're still going to have a lot of problems to work out, and I expect Gonzaga to win it pretty comfortably.
Yeah, so let me add that yesterday, the NCAA decided to hand out a waiver to Andrew Nebhard, basically at the 11th hour, which makes him immediately eligible for Gonzaga. Andrew Nebhard, hands down, in my opinion, was the best transfer in the transfer portal this year. Absolute superstar that I think could not be a better fit for a Mark Hughes system. The immediate comparison for me is Nigel Williams-Goss, and if you remember when Nigel Williams-Goss played for Gonzaga, they made it to the championship and honestly should have beat North Carolina in that year. Gave them everything they had. Carolina just had more experience and probably a few better players to pull it out at the end. Um, so, and the funny part for me is I don't even think Nebhard starts because they're so loaded at guard with Jalen Suggs and Joel Ayayi. And then they obviously have Corey Kispert playing the wing. So really, at any time, I feel that Gonzaga has the four best players on the court against Kansas. I also strongly, strongly, strongly feel that Gonzaga is the best team in the country now. I know I spent a lot of the Power Conference preview talking about Baylor and saying Baylor was the best. With Nebhard, I don't know that Baylor can hang with Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga is loaded. And another thing to go into Gonzaga a little bit more, Drew Timme, I think Petrusev was awesome. I think it's also true that usually in their second year, players take a huge step for Mark Few. Timme does a lot more with the ball than Petrusev could. Petrusev is more back to the basket, play off the low post. Timme can handle it.
You can see that because he wasn't an NBA prospect, despite how productive he was.
Right. And Timme can handle it. He can get others involved. He can shoot it. And that matchup against someone like David McCormick, who's very paint limited, is tough. So I think that Kansas just really at every level is undermatched in this game. Marcus Garrett can lock down whoever he wants on Gonzaga, but there's 4 other guys, at least 3 other guys that are going to get loose. And same thing if Agbaji takes a huge step and it becomes a great defender, you still have 2 guys that are going to be able to score on Gonzaga. So I think it's Gonzaga in a blowout, honestly. I think there's just much more that Kansas has to do to contain Gonzaga than the other way around, where I think Gonzaga is going to focus on Bryce Thompson. And if they don't, honestly, he might get loose in the first half and they might have to adjust. But I just don't see a path for Kansas to win this game. And I think Gonzaga really is that good. I think instead of now, for me, the question was, is Gonzaga good enough to be the number 1 team in the country? Now I think it's, can anyone beat Gonzaga? I think they're really that good this year. And this is Few's best chance to win the title, in my opinion. So we'll move to Friday now. We have Gonzaga again, who has a lot of games early. They're playing Auburn again in Fort Myers. Auburn, so Sharif Cooper was supposed to be a superstar for Auburn. He has not practiced in a few weeks, and it seems like he's not going to be playing for Auburn this year. There's some recruiting issues. It sounds like he may be going either overseas or going to the G League or whatever, just preparing for the draft. Huge loss for Auburn if that's true. Hopefully everything gets straightened out and he can play for them, but a thin Auburn team who lost a ton last year loses their best player. So I think Gonzaga, again, obviously I think they're loaded. I think this is an easy win for Gonzaga. But I'm more interested just to watch this game and see what Auburn looks like. Bruce Pearl, I think, has done a great job there. I want to see if he's reloaded and really what that offense can do with such an really unknown offense and unknown players for the most part.
Yeah, and we should mention with Auburn that a few days ago they self-imposed a postseason ban for this season.
Which is a joke, but we'll talk about that some other time.
Right, yeah. Right, with the expectation that they were going to be facing some penalties from the NCAA over the FBI investigation and Chuck Person, who was their assistant coach, who was heavily involved in that. So, but the fact that they did that kind of gives you an indication of what Auburn expects from their team this year, which is not very much. I think they probably would not have self-imposed a postseason ban if they thought they had a good shot at making the postseason or at least going far in it. So, yeah, like you said, I mean, the absence of Sharif Cooper is going to be a potential problem for Auburn. And I would expect Gonzaga to win this one pretty comfortably too. I mean, I think I'll be saying that about most Gonzaga games, and chances are they'll probably lose 1 or 2 of them somewhere. But you really have to consider Gonzaga the favorites against pretty much anybody right now.
Yeah, and we get into this in the mid-major preview, but Gonzaga, their conference. So last year BYU was pretty solid. This year BYU is not going to be as good as last year. St. Mary's seems to be on a down year. Teams like San Francisco and Pepperdine probably are going to be a little bit better than usual, but Gonzaga should run through that conference. So if they get through this early season where they're beating the likes of, Auburn and then beating a Kansas, you have to start talking about undefeated season. Again, we have a lot of time to discuss that. Another game that would have happened was Virginia against Florida, postponed for right now. We'll see if that gets made up. That one I was interested in just to see. I think Florida would have really struggled in that one because I don't think they can score in general, and then you play the best defense usually every year. That one, you could have seen some explosions on the court, I think. So Saturday, there's really only one super notable game. Notre Dame plays Michigan State. I'm just interested. I don't think this is necessarily a great game to watch. I'm just interested to see what both teams look like. Notre Dame's kind of stuck in purgatory and hasn't been good in a while, and Michigan State is probably the least talented they've been in the last handful of years. But they're looking forward to next season anyways. So what do you think about this game, Jonah?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michigan State is a really interesting team this year because they have lost some very important pieces to the NBA, including Xavier Tillman and Cassius Winston, who were probably their two most important players last year. Um, Josh Langford will be back. It's a question of what we end up seeing from him because he's had injury issues, and even when he has played, he's been hot and cold. So they're going to rely a lot on those guards in Langford, Rocket Watts, Aaron Henry. I think will be an important piece for them as well. So I would expect Michigan State to win this game just because Notre Dame was not awesome last year, and they lost their two best players in Mooney and TJ Gibbs. So I would expect that this is going to be another rough year in South Bend. But yeah, in this particular game, I think they could put up a decent fight because I think Michigan State will still have some kinks to work out. They really have a reworked roster versus last year, but I would expect Michigan State to pull this one out.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And to add to, so I'm going into this game just having questions about Michigan State and trying to see what the answers are going to be. So first one, just what Josh Langford looks like, basically having sat out for 2 straight seasons. And then Rocket Watts, I think, like I said with Mark Few, a lot of people seem to take a big leap in their second year. I think the same is true for Izzo and his guards, especially. They typically take a leap in their second seasons. Rocket Watts is going into a whole new role now. He goes from kind of playing a combo guard off ball with Cassius to probably what he's more comfortable with being the point guard. And then what does Joey Hauser look like, I think is interesting as well. Sam Hauser's getting a ton of credit for Virginia and possible player of the year aspirations. Joey Hauser had a very good career with Marquette as well, and I think he's going to be an important part of the Spartans lineup. And then the last question is just what does their forward/center rotation look like? There's no Xavier Tillman, there's no Nick Ward. There's not a whole lot, I don't think, that they have on the bench that I'm interested to see what he does with that rotation. And then Notre Dame, like you said, lose Mooney and Gibbs. I think it's going to be a rough year. And I think there's going to start to be questions about Mike Bray and his job safety, which is something I did not think I'd ever be saying probably 5 years ago. So Sunday, Baylor was supposed to play Seton Hall, which I was very excited to watch because I think that would have been a tough test for Baylor. That's canceled. So let's go to Houston, Texas Tech instead. I think this is one of the more intriguing matchups. So what do you think about this game?
Well, I really like Texas Tech. I mean, I mentioned them in our major conference preview, which you guys should check out, that I have Texas Tech finishing second in the Big 12 this year. I have a lot of confidence in Chris Beard. They do lose Jamias Ramsey, who I think will be a big loss for them, but they're just reloading with again, like higher caliber recruits than Texas Tech has really ever seen. So I really like Texas Tech in this game. I think that Houston's going to be a strong team this year. I think they'll be one of the better teams in the AAC, but I think the loss of Nate Hinton early to the NBA draft, when he didn't end up getting drafted, he did sign as an undrafted free agent, but I think that's a tough blow for Houston. But yeah, I mean, with Quentin Grimes, we're going to see how he looks defending Texas Tech's guards. And yeah, I mean, I like Texas Tech in this game, but I could definitely see this one going either way. I think this is one of the best games of the weekend for sure.
Yeah, I think I would highly suggest watching this one. Honestly, of all the games we talk about, I think this would be the game to watch. Houston has a ton of potential. I think they're nearly a lock to win the American. I think SMU will put up a little bit of a fight, but I think Houston is clearly the best. So my question for them is just who their best player is. Is it going to be Quentin Grimes because he had all this hype going to Kansas and didn't perform at Kansas, then comes to Houston and plays decently well, but is he going to take the next step? Or is it going to be Caleb Mills, who I think is going to win Player of the Year in that conference? And then for Texas Tech, they have a ton of roster turnover. And it's kind of like the land of the misfit toys, but I want to see how they come together and what they look like on the court. I want to see what Amari Burnett looks like, as Jonah mentions, the best recruit in the history of Texas Tech basketball. Personally, I'm going to go with Houston in this one just because I think the lack of continuity for Texas Tech and the weird preseason gives Houston just a little bit of an advantage because they've been together for longer. But this, between two coaches in Kelvin Sampson and Chris Beard, plus how good Houston is, and plus just how athletic Texas Tech is, this is going to be a very fun game to watch.
Yeah, one other guy I do want to mention for Houston is DeJon Jarreau. I think he's going to be a key player for them this year. I think how he plays will determine a lot of how well Houston does because he ended up with a similar scoring average as last year, like last year as the year before when Houston was so successful, but his efficiency really declined a lot. I mean, he went from shooting 36% from 3-point range in 2019 to shooting 18% last year. So if Houston really wants to make the strides that they're looking to make, they're going to look for a return to form from him. So I'll be watching him in this game for sure.
All right, so that brings us to Monday, which is the Maui Invitational, which is taking place very much not in Maui. This will be taking place in Asheville, North Carolina. We have, to start it out, there's 4 games on Monday. This first game is Texas against Davidson. Davidson, I think, not quite as good as we're used to, but still have some guys that can flat out score. And I think it'll be a decent test to see what we have in Texas. Honestly, it's a game that Texas typically would slip up and maybe not lose, but at least it would be close and competitive. I want to see if this is the old Texas or the Texas that this team should be, where they're very tough, very competitive, and really hammered a team like Davidson. And then I'm interested to see how they use Greg Brown. I think he is a guy that can really be used in a ton of different ways. You'll see him all over the court. And I just want to see how he functions on their offense because I think their offense is what holds them back typically, and that it's usually Matt Coleman trying to make a play at the last minute. So what do you think about this game, Jonah?
Yeah, so I agree with what you said about Texas in particular and what you said in your notes that the old version of Texas would lose a game like this, like a game that they should be favored to win. But early in the season, still figuring stuff out. A team with a lot of continuity in Davidson, that's the kind of team that Texas has really struggled with. But Davidson does lose a lot from last year. They lose John Axel Goodmanson, particularly, who was probably the best basketball player that Iceland has ever seen, I would probably say.
And second that Davidson has ever seen behind Steph, I think, is also very fair.
Right, yeah. So I think Davidson faces a lot of issues. Like you said, Texas should win this game, and I will pick them to win this game. But they just keep biting you in the ass over and over again when you pick them to win games like this. So this is kind of a wait and see for me.
Yeah, I think for a diehard college basketball fan, that's a game to watch where you kind of are very skeptical of Texas and you see what they look like early. But this tournament, I think, will tell us a lot about Texas. So the next game in the tournament is Indiana against Providence. I think you picked Providence as your sleeper, right? For the Big East?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I picked Indiana as my sleeper in the Big Ten, too.
Sleepers. All right, so have at it. What do you got?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, I really like both of these teams. I like Indiana a little bit better. I think I had them both as sleepers in their respective conferences, but I think Indiana's in the better conference. And I think that Trace Jackson Davis is just going to be a little bit too much for Providence's front line to handle. I really like David Duke for Providence. I mentioned him on the preview pod, but yeah, I think Indiana's probably going to have too much for Providence in the end here, although I really do like both of these teams. I expect to see them both in the tournament.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think this game's going to be pretty quick. A bunch of athletic guards that can flat out go. David Duke is if you don't know who he is, you'll know who he is by the end of the year. I'm pretty confident in that. But like you said, I think Trace Jackson Davis is the best player on the floor here. And I think he'll have plenty of success against a team in Providence that is thinner on the front line than they have been in years past. The thing for me that I'm interested to see is Christian Lander and his fit in Indiana. I think the first few weeks of the season, the most important thing is to watch freshmen and just see, first of all, do they live up to the hype that they had in high school? And second of all, how they mesh as an overall or with their overall team. Christian Lander, I think, can do a lot on the basketball court. He can flat out score it. He's athletic. And he can get people involved really well, too. So I think him with Trace Jackson Davis is a deadly duo. and Indiana and Archie Miller have a lot that I think they need to do well this year. Last year they were fringe tournament team. This year they should very easily make the tournament, and if not, that's another seat that's getting really hot. So last game or second to last game, UNC versus UNLV. Not as interesting as I make it out to be, honestly, but UNLV did knock off San Diego State for their first loss last year towards the end of the regular season. Struggled, but you could see the improvement. I don't think they're necessarily a great team, but their coach, TJ Otzelberger, that comes over from South Dakota State, I think is a very solid coach and will get his team back. Not back to the 90s where they're winning championships, I don't think, but they'll be competitive again and be a threat to make a tournament. But UNC, I think this is a good first look at them to see really how good they're going to come together. But the number one thing I'm looking at is what those minutes look like on the front line. I'm expecting Garrison Brooks and Armando Bacot to start. Beyond that, I want to see how often guys like Sharp and Kessler get involved. And if they're not playing a lot, what that looks like also. I think Roy Williams has a big really issue on his hands with how to allocate minutes. And we'll get a lot of that in the first game, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bigs to shuffle around for UNC. I mean, like, you need Garrison Brooks to get his minutes for sure. I mean, he's one of the contenders for preseason player of the year in the ACC. You got Armando Bacot. You got a lot of other bigs fighting for minutes there. I think UNC should win this game pretty easily, but I do think UNLV will be an interesting team this year. They're going to bring in David Jenkins this year, who transferred to UNLV from South Dakota State along with TJ Otzelberger when he came. And people were saying last year he was unquestionably the best player on the team. Like, you could see that in practices. So I think it'll be interesting to see him in a UNLV uniform, but I think that their run in the Maui/Asheville Invitational will probably end with this game.
So that brings us to the last game of the first round, which would be Stanford against Alabama. Very underrated game, I think. Stanford and Alabama are two teams that are fringe top 25. Both, I think, should be legit candidates to make the tournament. And you're also getting your first look at Zaire Williams, who at one point was a very hyped high school recruit, kind of slid down the ranks when he missed a bunch of games at the beginning for Sierra Canyon. But you could see how talented he was as he got back into the flow of the game. So for me, I'm looking at how good Stanford could be with Zaire and Oscar da Silva. And then for Alabama, I think Oates is building something. And I think they're going to be a little overrated to start. I'm not the biggest John Petty fan, but I really want to see Javon Quinterly. I loved him going to Villanova. I thought he could be a stud at Villanova. Wasn't crazy about the playing time, and as he famously mentioned on his Instagram, that was his second choice. So we'll see what he looks like at Alabama now, but I think he's going to be a very, very, very good player. So what do you think about this game, Jonah?
Yeah, so I really like Alabama a lot. I had them as my sleeper in the SEC. I think they will win this game. I do like Stanford as well. I think Zaire Williams will be big for them. He's their first 5-star recruit since Reed Travis back in 2014. So good things happening with the Stanford program. I would guess they'll probably be favored in this game, Stanford. But
I don't know.
But yeah, I really like what Nate Oates is building in Alabama. They do lose Kyra Lewis from last year, but as you said, they're bringing in Javon Quinterly, who should be able to replace him pretty well. And they're bringing back John Petty. They're bringing back Jaden Shackelford. So I think this is going to be a really strong Alabama team, and I expect them to start off the season with a win here.
I don't know the spread, but the F or BPI or whatever, the basketball power thing for ESPN, it's 50-50. So it's probably going to be one or two or even. I personally, I think Stanford wins it, but for podcast purposes, we're going to go with Jonah. So that would bring our next matchup, which would be the second round. We're going to go through these quickly since we just talked about all the teams. But our second round matchup would be UNC Stanford. So who do you have in this one?
I would take
UNC Alabama. My bad.
Well, I would take UNC either way. I think that they just have too strong a front court. They have a lot of players coming back. either Stanford or Alabama will be introducing significant new players into the rotation. So I think it'll take a little bit of time to work those out. So yeah, I'll have UNC advancing to the final there.
Yeah, me too. And I didn't mention this, and I don't know if you did, but UNC, I want to see what that guard rotation looks like too, just because I know Caleb Love is going to start. I'm no doubt in that. But then are we going Anthony Harris and Leaky Black? Are we going with freshmen? Very interested to see what happens there. And I think that will tell us a lot about what North Carolina looks like this year. So then the other semifinal game will be Texas, Indiana. This one I think is a lot tougher. For me, I hate this. I don't like either team in that they never do what they're supposed to do, at least recently. Texas is the better team on paper, so I'm going to go Texas, expecting that they've turned it around this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me personally, I'll just go Indiana just to be a little bit different. I agree that these are teams that have often found themselves in similar situations. So, two great coaches who have both underachieved a little bit in really big jobs. So, yeah, I'll take Indiana, but that's a game I could certainly see going either way.
So then, for easy purposes, we're just going to go UNC in the winning the Asheville Maui. I think honestly, Texas or Indiana can make it interesting with them in that they guard them and they're athletic in the front line. Like I would love to see a Greg Brown or a Trace Jackson Davis against Garrison Brooks. I think that'd be a lot of fun to watch. But UNC should handle the Maui, and if they do, honestly, those are pretty good pretty good early season wins where North Carolina should start to get the respect that both you and I think they deserve. So to wrap this up, there's no better way to wrap it up than the Champions Classic. Although I will say this might be the worst Champions Classic in a long time. So first game, Michigan State, which is going to be at Cameron. They're playing Duke. Michigan State, we talked about earlier, kind of lacking talent this year. Just a weird roster, honestly. Duke, tons of freshmen. And they're supposed to play Gardner Webb actually today. That game got canceled because of Gardner Webb's COVID tests. So they'll be playing Coppin State on Saturday before they take on Michigan State. So I do like that they get one prep in, but I don't see any way Michigan State is competitive in this game.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, I just think Duke is way stronger up and down the roster.
Yeah, Duke's the Champions Classic has gone quite well for Duke, and now they get to play a game at home for the Champions Classic. I think that helps even more. I know no fans, but still. Yeah, this is more a game for me to judge how good Michigan State, I guess, could be. If Michigan State keeps it close, I'll give them a lot of respect. If they get blown out, I'm going to have some questions of, are they even a tournament team, I think. Enough about that one. That's kind of a waste of a game, I think. So Kentucky, Kansas, really two opposite teams. You have complete freshman team, basically, no experience whatsoever at the college level versus a team mostly with entire experience. Plus Bryce Thompson, obviously. So I would say Kentucky has at least twice the talent Kansas does. But I mentioned in our preview that I'm not sure that the Kentucky freshmen fit together as well as some Wildcats fans are going to hope they fit together. So again, this is sort of like a Texas game where on paper I feel like Kentucky's infinitely better, but I'm not so sure it's going to work out that way.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think about this game kind of the opposite of the way I thought about Kansas' game against Gonzaga. Like against Gonzaga, I just think that they'll be much less of a cohesive unit. I think they're less talented, but even if they're also less talented than Kentucky, there's a lot of other factors here, and both of these teams will be working in some new aspects into their rotations. So I'm going to actually pick Kansas in this one. I think that they'll be coming off a pretty big loss against Gonzaga, so I think they'll be pretty motivated in this one. And I think that Kentucky's freshmen might not be able to put up with that in their first game. I think Kentucky, and this is what I said in the preview, I think they'll drop down from their ranking early on and then come back to it later. So I would expect that pattern to continue, and I'll take Kansas.
Yeah, I think Kentucky sometimes struggles in the Champions Classic. I view this Kentucky team as the team 2 years ago where they played Duke and lost by 34. And it wasn't even that close. I think they will struggle in this game. And I think Kansas guards them like crazy. Like I think Marcus Garrett causes absolute issues for all the Kentucky guards. Um, I just want to watch Kentucky. I want to see what they look like because I really don't have any idea. Is BJ Boston going to handle the ball? Is it going to be Devin Askew? Like I don't know what Kentucky does. I think they're going to struggle at halftime. I think they're going to be down a bit, but I think they're going to come back and get hot in the second half and just sneak this one out. I just don't believe in Kansas at all. So I'm going Kentucky here. All right, so after that, Wednesday is supposed to be the Jimmy V Classic in Indianapolis, but Gonzaga, Tennessee was already canceled, and the other game was supposed to be Baylor and Illinois. Baylor has to get healthy in order for that game to happen, and we really hope they do. And then after that, on Saturday, you would have Gonzaga against Baylor again in Indianapolis. Please let Baylor be healthy for that stretch because Wednesday and Saturday, Baylor plays the 8th-ranked team, the number 1 team. So hopefully we can talk about those next week. But that is our really week 1 college basketball preview. Anything else to add, Jonah?
No, not much more than that, but I'm looking forward to the games, especially the Maui Asheville stuff on Monday. So yeah, we'll be back next week to go over what happened in those and talk about what's coming out.
Yeah, so stuff your face with some turkey and all those good things and watch a whole lot of sports and listen to our podcast while you're doing it.